The journey of this book and this session starts here. We have an author, we have a translator, and we have a publisher. And that might sound like an absolutely horrendous oversimplification and insult to all of them, because all of them and all of you and we are all multiple identities. We cannot simplify this in any way at all. We're all, as Elvira Dones says, we're all very messed up. We've been saying that
in a very good way.
Messed up in a very good way. Linguistically and culturally, we're all very messed up. So what we're going to do in this session is discuss this idea of multiculturalism, multilingualism in our life, in our literature, and in translation, very much in translation. And we're going to talk about it specifically in relation to this book, Sworn Virgin, which is the perfect book to highlight all these issues. So to start off with, I'm not going to do a Wikipedia introduction to everyone. You have all the bios on a piece of paper somewhere, and you can look it up afterwards. But what I'm going to do is ask each of them to describe themselves linguistically. What is their own linguistic background? Elvira Dones, where did you come from?
I came from a very small language, small because we are a very little country, from the Albanian language. I grew up under a communist dictatorship, so I always remember, since I was 4 or 5 years old, I had this sensation of not being able to breathe. And that grew up with me. So one day I left the country. So yes, I come from Albania. My first language is Albanian, but I consider myself a linguistic gypsy or a nomad or an island sometimes, because Italian, because of the English, because of the French, because of the Spanish and another language that I'm grappling with right now.
Which is Hebrew. You're trying to...
Yes. I'm ashamed to say that, but yes. Ashamed because it's completely different from the other languages. But yes, I consider
How
myself...
did you learn Italian?
This is a very nice story, but I do not want to tire you. I was 10 when I asked my father to give me the possibility to find a group of people that were studying Italian at the time, and they were all grown-ups, adults, but my father knew the teacher, so it was this tall man, and then I came to know that they were members of the Secret Service and of the army in Albania, but no matter, that was my first, I loved Italian and I wanted to start from the Italian language.
Elvira has told us many stories this week already. That one I haven't heard yet. Learning Italian from the Albanian Secret Service. So you went on and you studied English at university in Tirana. Is that correct? And then you went to live in the States. So you've got English, Italian, and Albanian. Your three main languages.
The 3 main languages. Yes.
And you've ended up in Switzerland, which is a pretty good multilingual place to live in. But anyway, Clarissa, anyway, I'll let you describe your own linguistic journey.
It's hard to compete with Elvira's stories, but I'll try. If you were a gypsy, I suppose I had a very peripatetic childhood. My mother always said that she had a crash course in comparative obstetrics. Because she had 5 children in 7 years in 5 different countries. My father was a writer and she was a painter, and they had no money. And so they relied on grants and foundations. And so I was born in Puerto Rico. And then it went on mostly South America, so Brazil and Mexico. But another brother was born in Venice. Which I still remember distinctly, and another, I can't remember, Brazil, Mexico. Anyway, we're all over the place. So I started school in Spanish and was fluent in Spanish, but when my mother took us away and left my father because she was fed up of all this traveling.
What was she fed up with?
I think an awful lot of things. We landed in her country, which is England. She's English. My father was American. And I clung to that identity as a safe place, I think.
Being both American and English.
And English, yes. But when I first arrived, I had little gold studs in my ears because we came from Mexico City and I was called the gypsy when I first went to primary school, as a slur, of course, because they didn't wear earrings in those days. Young girls didn't wear earrings. So I think I have always considered myself English.
And the Italian?
The Italian came much later.
You live in Rome.
Yes, I live in Rome. I've lived in Rome for nearly 40 years now. I studied English literature at Cambridge, and then I changed to languages opportunistically because I had fallen in love. And so,
I think somebody should do a PhD on this.
On this, I think they should.
Falling in love and languages and how you adopt languages has a huge role to play.
So I moved to Rome after graduation, and that's been my stable place ever since.
Stefan, beat that if you can. I know you can. Your background is also.
Well, I mean, it's my parents who sort of did strange things. Perhaps like a lot of our parents, and it feels like lives are getting more and more boring through the generations. But my parents were working in Brazil when I was born. Slightly unusual job. They were there to translate the Bible into an indigenous language. It's not what I would choose as a career path or completely defend, but that's what they had. My dad is Swiss and came to England and Ireland and Scotland as a teenager.
Swiss German.
He's Swiss German, yeah.
See, that's what you have to say in Switzerland. You do have to distinguish, don't you? Yes.
I was working in hotels, and then a Protestant Irish couple in Dublin converted him. And he met my mum at Bible school, who had been a maths teacher but was also decided to follow the Lord's calling. And that took them to Brazil, where they went and started living in an indigenous community. Not an isolated one, I should add. It was a community that, interestingly, although I didn't realize at the time, this language that I was starting to speak with the little kids was actually a French Creole that they had picked up because they were up near the French-Guiana border and for a while had been in French Guiana. So, and they also have a complete mix of identities in a way too. They had a lot of contact to what are called quilombos in Brazil, where runaway slaves formed their own communities. So, for example, there's a story that they have which involves a tug of war between a whale and an elephant. Not perhaps what you'd expect from a Brazilian Indian community. So so that was my first other language, Caribuna.
So your languages, and you translate as well when you have lots of free time from publishing books.
I wish.
I know something. So Portuguese and German, those are your languages.
Yeah, the two I translate.
And you translate from Italian.
Yes.
And Elvira writes in Italian and Albanian. Before we move on to talk about the book, I just want to know how you feel about being multilingual, multicultural. Is it for you a positive part of your life? Are there problems with it? Do you feel split? Let's explore that idea first of all. Is it easy for you to move from language to language?
Yes, that is very easy for me, and I consider it a very healthy madhouse. I mean, it's a contradiction, I know, but it's sort of a madhouse because in our family, my husband is half Swiss German, half Swiss Italian. My mother-in-law is German, and my father-in-law was Swiss French. So it has always been a family, a household with many languages. So in a way, it helped me being the crazy mind that I had. Languages to me are sort of person. I consider them as people. You create a very close relationship, but sometimes you get tired of that kind of relationship when it's too tight, and then you just jump on the other one. So I feel very comfortable with that. But sometimes it gives me a sense of guilt, especially towards my mother tongue, towards Albanian, which I love with a passion. But it is 30 years now, I do not live the language every day. I do not live the language for long periods of time. So it slips away that's why then when I started writing in Italian, it came after years and years and years. It was not an easy decision to make because literature to me is the only religion I have in a way. So now I consider my Albanian, I feel guilty towards it. It's not that I do not write it, it's not that I do not speak it, but after the fall of the communist regime, the Albanian language has been thriving. So each time I go there, I find the slang so beautiful, so vivid. We spoke once, I grew up with a totalitarian Albanian, which was very, very rigid. There is nowhere to be seen right now. So each time I go, I learn new things, but at the same time, it's as if it's sort of another language because I'm not practicing it every day. And my friends, they make a point in making me feel guilty. The first day and the second day, they say, "You speak weird."
Weird Albanian.
So it's always a sense of betrayal and love at the same time. Which I do not have with the other languages because the roots are not in them. I mean, my blood is Albanian. So the only sense of guilt is towards the Albanian language, not the other languages. With the other ones, I fool around, I play with them. They love me, I love them, I think. And it's a very happy love affair.
Would you ever, when you're sitting next to two translators, would you ever translate? You've been working with translators for the last few days.
And it has been so beautiful.
What have you learned from the last few days? Has it put you off translating your own work, for instance, or would you now attempt to possibly translate?
Unfortunately, I have done it a couple of times.
Unfortunately,
because it's a matter of time as well. Either you write or you translate. And for reasons very long to explain here, two of my publishers pushed me and said, "Why don't you write directly in Italian?" Because one of the translations from the Albanian into English, and the title of the novel was Burned Sun, Sole Bruciato.
Which Clarissa eventually translated.
Well, no, I didn't. I mean, I haven't. I've translated a sample, and I'm desperately trying to persuade people to publish it.
They're using the platform to pitch. I don't know whether that's the right thing to do, but anyway.
So basically what I did, because the publisher wanted it, I translated my book, and of course they gave me an excellent editor, which was Fausto Vitaliano. And then I translated only one of my books, again, from Albanian into English, but into Italian, pardon me. Other than that, no. I think in the end of the day, I would be a very bad translator.
So what is a good translator then? Because you obviously are.
Well, Elvira, you talked about betrayal and love of your country. I think we all have said during the workshops that translation is betrayal and love. It's an act of love. Obviously, it's an act of betrayal because you are constantly changing things in the workshop. We were constantly working with, how much can we change? Can we move a comma? Can we move a full stop? Can we actually change the whole meaning of the sentence or the rhythm, or do we have to replicate it? So I think a good translation is something that reads seamlessly, that is not a postcard from the country, as I think someone famously said, but is actually something that reads seamlessly in the language that you are writing in.
And you are an Italian translator, so why are you a translator and not a writer, for example? Just to follow up on this thing.
That's a very interesting question. I've explored it. I tend to be second fiddle. I'm a violinist. I'm always second. I prefer the position. I like singing contralto. I like singing underneath. I like playing underneath. I now play the viola. I like being behind the scenes. And I think translating fits that for me. I don't have that creative urge. I'm not impelled to write, but I love playing with writing, and I love writing.
And it is as creative as writing. I mean, Stefan, what do you think about what you've heard so far? Where do you fit into all of that as far as your own languages go and translation, which you did once upon a time, much more than you do now?
I think translation's just the most amazing way to spend time with a really good book. It sometimes doesn't quite feel like that when you've still got a lot of it to do and a little bit of time, but generally, it is just an amazingly
and the
close
fact
experience to
that
the
you
text.
read translations and it's from so many different cultures now, you see, you hover over all of them, as well as the editor and publisher. I mean, what have you noticed as far as the, if you like, the level of translation as well? Is this the numbers of books being translated are increasing? The numbers of, do you think the quality is the quality?
I mean, I'm not really the right person to ask about that, because as soon as the book's gone to someone else, it's probably the last thing that I'm going to get around to reading when the translation comes out, because there's all the other submissions of things that we could potentially be publishing that people.
So you're not as close to it as you.
So I don't read as many of your translations, people's translations, as I'd like to, because it's gone then.
Well, let's start you off then talking specifically about this book, because it is thanks to all of you that this book has come to life. And this is what I call a miracle of translation. And in fact, when we were trying to decide on the title for this session, that was one of the titles I suggested, was The Miracle of Translation, because this book, Sworn Virgin, which was published in 2014, I believe, written by Elvira in Italian, translated by Clarissa, and published by Stefan and Other Stories, is a book about multiple identities and somebody who speaks several languages. So before we talk about the journey of the book, I think you probably need to know just a little bit about the story, which we agreed I'll quickly give you a very short synopsis. And I think what I'm going to do is just read my own even shorter synopsis than the one on the back of the book. And so this is Sworn Virgin. So Hannah, who is the main character, Hannah is 34. She's been living as a man for 14 years in a village in northern Albania. This village has 280 people. She was a sworn virgin. She became a sworn virgin at the age of 20 years old. And that was to avoid being, this was in the 1980s, and Albania was still a Stalinist dictatorship, one of the worst of all the East European countries, very cruel, nasty regime. And Elvira has suffered horrendously under that regime. And Hannah, in order to avoid being sold off and married to a man she didn't love, decided, and this was an option that was open to her, she decided to become a sworn virgin. And she became Mark, literally within an hour. She walked up the stairs, she put on some male clothes, and very quickly started to drink raki and carry a gun and work on the farm. And that is Hannah's story becoming Mark. Then she went to the United States 14 years later, at the age of 34, and she stayed with her cousin. She had the option to go and stay with her cousin, Albanian cousin from the same area. And she decided, in that act of moving to the States, that she would then become a woman again. She had the freedom to become a woman again. Now, before we get on to talking about the translation and the publication, this story of the Sworn Virgins, which is a very specifically Albanian story, tell us about these remarkable women and what happened to them, and how many sworn virgins there are, and how you came upon Hannah's story.
Well, starting to answer your last question, there are more or less, there has never been a very serious census about them, but to my estimate, there are 30 of them left. They are all very old women right now, but this is a tradition that goes on for 6 centuries. Only in the deep north of Albania, the Albanian Alps. So there have been cases of sworn virgins in Montenegro as well, in Kosovo as well, and in Serbia. So I came to know about them, I was around 16, I think, as far as I remember, when the neighbors of my parents in the house that I was, where I used to live with my parents, the neighbors were from the north. And one day they came with this album. They were just back from a trip in the northern part of Albania, where they had this wedding, this big wedding of the family. And in this album, I saw a very tall, beautiful man in the middle. And I asked the neighbor, I said, uncle, because as I said, in a sign of respect for us, uncle were all the adults, or aunties were all the women. So it was not related to blood. That, oh, this is your Batsa, and Batsa is the old man of all the family, of all the big clan. There were more than 30 people in that beautiful picture. And he said, no, my dear, he is not a man, he's a sworn virgin. I said, what? He said, oh, well, you will grow, one day you'll grow up and you'll come to know about them. So later on in the college years and university years, I was so much fascinated by our fellow students, especially the girls that came from the north. We didn't travel our countries in those years. We were not allowed to drive a car. We were kept under control. So the tourism is not the domestic tourism was not something that we knew about. We only went if we had family in another town, especially along the coast, but not the north. And these students, these friends of ours, when the academic year was over, they just disappeared. They disappeared because they went up north.
So it was in the north.
And we were very loud kids. I mean, Tirana kids, we felt better than everyone because we were in the capital. We were a little bit freer than them. But I think the writer in me started to be there very, very early. They had a poise. They were much more silent. They weighed their words. So I was so fascinated by them. And I tried to ask them a couple of times about the sworn virgins. They told me about this, but there were no books, there was nothing so as to make me know more. To make a very long story short, then I left Albania, I started writing other books, I shot a couple of documentaries, and I was in the northern part of Albania for another documentary. I was shooting another documentary for the Swiss Public Television. And I asked our stringer, our interpreter, if by chance we ran into a sworn virgin, please to tell me. So one day this man on a mule, and it was the end of April, if I'm not wrong.
Which year was this?
It was, if I am not wrong, 2001. And it was full of snow to here. Our car couldn't go to the village where we were heading to. And this man that was smoking, and he was on a mule, told us the direction and said, no, don't go there. You stop here for tonight. So our stringer, he came in the car again, and later he told me, did you see the man? He is a sworn virgin.
So the man on the mule?
Yes, the man on the mule I would have never told. Because when they take the vow of eternal virginity, they cannot go back. But at the same time, they have to brutalize themselves. So they start drinking, they carry the rifle, they lose every right as a woman. You lose some and you win some, you gain something. You are not obliged to serve a man anymore. You can go out of the village by yourself. So you gain in social status.
So the fact that Hannah in this story, she wanted to free herself of the constraints of being a woman in a very traditional society.
Yes. So
did you, Clarissa, come to the story first, or did you read the book? How did you come to this? I mean, it's an extraordinary story. I had never heard of that.
I'd never heard of it
before I read this book.
And since then, there's that incredible collection of photographs that are very representative because they're different ages. And of course, as people get older, they do become more sexless in a way, and so they do look very much like old men. The story, I came across the story, I was just editing a women's magazine in Italy that had a little tiny review, and I just thought this sounds fascinating. I'm going to go and get it, and I went and bought it immediately, the old centenary edition, and I read it. And then, luckily, Elvira already had a website, and I got in touch with her, and I said, "Can I translate a sample?" And that was the beginning of the journey of the book. But I think what's fascinating is that the Swan Virgin tradition is a construct. And it's nothing to do with sentiment, and that's what's so fascinating about it, because it's a social construct. And I was just talking with Elvira yesterday about how just in the last 5 years since the book was published, so much has changed in terms of how we talk about these things. And the non-binary gender fluidity thing, even only 5 years ago, it never occurred to any of us, not to Sophie, my lovely editor, not to you, not to Elvira, not to me, to use the singular they, or we didn't have any of those problems because it was a social construct and because it was a decision. It was nothing to do with her sexuality or her gender. There's no change. They smoked a lot of cigarettes, so their voices would be raspy.
And they drank a lot of raki.
And they drank a lot of raki and had very, very tough lives out in the fields. So they were,
And how easy or difficult was it to convince a publisher to publish this actually very strange book?
It's a very strange book, and I think that is really the little miracle, and it's never happened since, that I put the sample in the post, literally in a brown envelope, and that has never happened since, partly because we don't put things in brown envelopes anymore.
Oh no, we still get things in brown envelopes.
You do? Well, I don't. I'm saying
in green ink.
If I send a sample, I will now do it by email, if I can get hold of somebody's email, the commissioning editor or whatever. But it literally was a brown envelope and a little tiny presentation, and you had the instinct and acumen and wisdom. And curiosity, I think curiosity.
What was it like to read? Can you remember reading it?
Not the first time. I mean, obviously I remember once the whole book came in Clarissa's translation, reading that, but I'm afraid my memory's not good enough to remember the moment, and it would be nice to say, I remember the moment when I landed on it, but
that would make a nice moment on stage.
We do sort of have a pile of manuscripts sort of that big waiting to be read, and generally it's sort of a part of the work that tends to be well, it's sort of a little bit dreaded because we do have this open submissions policy, so anyone can send things in, and we do get all sorts of things, and most of the time they're not good. And obviously, it's then a real relief when something brilliant comes in, like this book. And it's just because, as you said, I didn't find it. I mean, I find the character situation is certainly unusual, but I wouldn't necessarily say that the book is strange to me. It feels very much, you really get in, it's a very psychological book. You really, you get into the head of
it's quite traditional too, in structure. It's quite traditional in the narrative because it's made up of present day and flashbacks to her past.
You see her, and you see the change from Hannah to Mark to Hannah, changing countries and
languages.
And I think it was also just fascinating that the change of language and place, and how obviously we talked more about the first half or so of the book, where she has become Mark and then is preparing to leave this role she has as a Swan Virgin. But then the second half in America is also interesting, because you might think then she arrives in America and it's all sort of very simple, but she also sees the construct in how the Albanian family she has that has gone to live in America, how they expect women to dress and behave in America, and Hannah again doesn't really want that. So it does show all sorts of different constructs, not just the
Can I ask
Albanians.
as a publisher though, I mean, when you get a book by an Albanian writer, your ears must prick up a little bit, because there aren't that many.
I don't know. Vera can tell us. I have to say I certainly don't get many submissions of Albanian writers, but probably we're just missing out. And Elvira can tell us who we should be reading.
Yes, it is. It's a pity because there are some wonderful pens that write in Albanian writers and poets, excellent ones. But it's such a small language if we go as compared to English, for example. So they do not find the venue, they do not find the editors, they don't find the publishers, and it's a huge pity. And
do you know any Albanian to English translators, Elvira?
Yes, there are some. Yes, now there are some, and they are very good, and they are trying to do something. But it's, I mean, you know better than me. I mean, the publishing world is difficult. It's a hard nut to crack, and sometimes they succeed. Sometimes in most cases, they do not succeed.
But on a language point of view, though, to stick with Sworn Virgin and the language issues, particularly with this one, the fact that you wrote it in Italian, and I mean that's in a way is that a political choice as well, or a publishing choice? It's obviously a linguistic choice for you.
No, I have been accused of it sometimes, but no, not at all. Not in all honesty. I was living with the Italian language every day. I did my journalistic work, or better, my documentaries, and I wrote my texts directly in Italian, and I collaborated with a number of Italian filmmakers, and we wrote the screenplays together. So when it came to literature, it was the right moment. In a way, it just the first sentences came to me in Italian. Sometimes I ask not myself but my mind, why now? And I do not know.
Even though this is your most Albanian book in many ways.
Yes.
And Clarissa, as far as the translation goes, I mean, the translation of this, there have been some really interesting reviews of this. Saying that there was one which says this book, Sworn Virgin, was written to be translated.
I think, Elvira,
Which
maybe
is a wonderful phrase,
is, yes.
but I do understand it really.
I don't know. Actually, I can't remember where the review comes from now. But I can't remember who said that. But I have to say that wouldn't be my favourite part of review. I feel like a book that isn't written to be translated would. I mean,
but this particular point, there was something I know that Clarissa had some strong views on.
I think, when you're talking about, why am I doing it in Italian? Maybe there was a distancing mechanism there, being able to write about your home country and this quite brutal tradition.
Yes,
another language.
I wanted to add something about that.
There was, go ahead.
Along the years, that's what I understood. I love the northern part of Albania. Is really, really, really beautiful. And those mountains, they impose themselves into you. To me, Sworn Virgin was a book on solitude, about solitude. I mean, you take this kind of decision, or you are forced to take this kind of decision when you are still 14, 13, you don't know anything about love, you don't know anything about sex. And what about later? When you fall in love, but you cannot tell anyone, you cannot even confide that to your sister or to your brother or to your mother and father, because it would be a dishonor at that point.
You could never go back, right?
The solitude of these women, and having me as a young girl suffered so much with the solitude of being an Albanian and not being free to talk, because we were raised with every morning from our parents, please watch your mouth. My father loved me with passion, but he knew that I was the black sheep of the family in a way. And one day, perhaps I would have been the person to put them in trouble, which happened later. But so it was this kind of solitude that I interiorized because it was there. So when I wrote it in Italian, it was as if I was defending myself from too much of an emotion. That's why.
And Clarissa, this idea though, which was actually just something that was put out there provocatively of this reviewer, that this book was made to be translated. I know that you do have views on that. So can you talk a little bit about that?
I think, I don't think that you were interpreting that quite right. I think what she meant, this was in the quarterly review, was that she became increasingly more comfortable with herself as she became more English. So her
Hannah did,
Hannah
the main
did,
character.
the main character. So I think one of the fascinating things about it as a translator was that Hannah's constant search when she first moved to America for words, she was always trying to name things. She was always trying to find a name for things. And of course, it's easy to name, the table and the lamp and the pen and the book, but it's not so easy to name your feelings and your emotions and your loneliness, your solitude. So it's an interesting, I think immigrant novels have become quite fashionable nowadays. Again, in the last 5 years, the emphasis has changed, I think. This is not an immigrant story. It's about emigration, and yet it becomes an immigrant story, but not of that kind where she wants to completely assimilate and become American. She wants to assimilate her own body and her own identity. So I think that's what they meant, is that it seems incredibly comfortable. She seems very comfortable with herself in her newfound language.
Yeah, and this thing about writing in a language or learning to speak a language that isn't your mother tongue is just to sort of circle around to where we said we were going to be ending up, where Switzerland. It was of course interesting for the Swiss Germans because it's a similar thing for them, that they write in what they would call High German, which is not the language they grow up speaking, as it were. The question of what is a language, and if a language is just something that needs an army or what, but certainly High German is very different to Swiss German, and but some people think that gives Swiss writers also a certain freedom, the same freedom that Elvira was talking about when writing in a language that is not the mother tongue, to play with it.
How do you, growing up in Switzerland, partly as you do, do you speak Swiss German, for instance?
No, in fact, I've never lived in Switzerland, and my dad, when my parents met, my mum decided, well, she'd better learn German, and then she went to Switzerland for a few months with him and realised that was no good. No one wanted to speak High German to her, particularly, sort of 50 years ago when the war was still closer and people were and also people had been forced to, or the schooling was in High German, but you would get beaten if you spoke Swiss German at school. So people didn't want to speak High German. So she then sort of was stuck, and my dad just spoke English at home. So I'm unfortunately, it's a bit like it's a big regret. I can't speak Swiss German. I just learned German at school.
Now, German is the majority language in Switzerland too, but it is interesting because on the surface you could argue that a country like Switzerland, which has 4 national languages, is the ideal country to live in as a linguist, because you can hop across all the different languages of French, German, Italian and Romansh, lots and lots of dialects and so on. And you live in the Italian part of Switzerland, so you're speaking Italian all the time anyway, and Albanian at home, I imagine, with your family. But what do you speak at home?
Well, English, French, Italian.
I knew it was easy.
And Spanish. So it's, yo tengo un cacao mental all the time. And for the immigrants, Albania is now, since the wall fell, it has become a country, a people of diaspora. 1.5 million Albanians left Albania, and they are still fleeing for different reasons, not for political reasons, but they are leaving the country. So it depends on where you land as an immigrant in Switzerland. Because when they come in Italy, in France, they have to grapple or struggle only with one language, and they have to assimilate that language. If you come and you are in the Swiss German part, you have the Schweizerdeutsch in the language of every day. But if you go to school, you have the Schriftdeutsch, you have the Hochdeutsch. So it is difficult, and so the Albanian diaspora, for example, the older generation, the parents, they keep to their Albanian and they speak Albanian with their kids. That in the meantime, they become Swiss Germans. And they speak Schweizerdeutsch and Hochdeutsch, who goes for the higher education. So it cuts both ways.
It depends where you land.
It depends on where you blend.
But the fact that, I mean, there was so much Italian television, well, not so much, it wasn't enough television being beamed in from the rest of Europe into Albania, but there's Greek television because of the proximity to Greece, and there's Italian television. So you picked up a lot of Italian, I imagine.
Well, we have a beautiful Swiss public television in the Italian language. So we have it in French, we have La Suisse Romande has it in French, we have it in Italian, and the other one that is in Zurich. So,
I mean, Clarissa, is Italian in Rome, is it different from Swiss Italian?
Yeah, I wouldn't know. I don't think I'm qualified to answer that because I've never really.
yeah,
Elvira can probably answer it better.
Yes, I can answer this better
She
because
asks most things. It's really
because
for anything.
because I'm closer to Milan than to Zurich. I mean, in 35 minutes I'm in Milan, and
It definitely feels very Italian.
Yeah,
That's
it
Switzerland for you.
It feels very Italian, but then Tirana, the capital of Albania, feels very Italian. The buildings are, fascist Italian.
Yes, Mussolini built them for us.
So it's and Berlusconi was a figurehead, wasn't he, for a long time?
Unfortunately.
So I think that's, I mean, going back to Switzerland, I think Switzerland must be a wonderful place to be a translator because there's good funding. And I think that Italy is shamefully negligent on that kind of soft power front. They don't have any governmental bodies, they don't have any institutions. The Foreign Office used to have a department and they cut that back. And there is no funding. If you think the amount of funding there is for French translation coming from the French government, the Italian government has zilch.
But to answer your question about the Italian we speak in Ticino, in the Italian-speaking section, it is much like the Milano way of speaking, so the northern part of Italy. It's even in the dialect, the Ticino dialect, which I speak, of course, because many people speak only, they speak both Italian and dialect, but they slip into dialect very,
So you speak like 6 or 7 languages?
Well,
what dialects? Ticino dialect and Italian. Do you speak Schweizerdeutsch?
Schweizerdeutsch, I know all the dirty words. And some more. But because of the Schweizerdeutsch, I lost my Hochdeutsch. I mean, I can read newspapers, but I cannot read fiction in Hochdeutsch. And yes, it's not a very rich Italian we speak in Ticino. As compared to Florence, for example, or as compared to Rome, which is completely another thing. But the Italian is a very regional language. So where do you say that this is better Italian than this one?
Mm-hmm. Let's come back very briefly to Swan Virgin, and if you've got some questions as well, we should have time. I'll ask Kate if there's time for questions. Swan Virgin is actually a book about language, and it is about somebody transforming themselves, translating themselves, to use your, not your phrase, but your feeling.
No, it's on all of our bags.
Yes,
it's on all we have our bags.
Yes.
Carrying across, she's carried across the ocean, she's carrying across identities, she's carrying across her cultural appropriations. So yes, definitely about translation in that sense.
And she says, doesn't she? She says when she's in the United States, Hannah, as she is transforming herself back into being a woman, she says that in fact the language is more important to her than her gender. That's a fascinating exploration. So tell us a little bit about that.
Because to transform her body was much harder than to communicate with people. So in all the years that she acted and was a man socially, and everyone respected her for that. Because the thing I failed to make clear is that, as I said before, you gain in social status and you lose all the rest. Because the women for centuries in Albania, as in Bulgaria, in all the Balkans, but especially in Albania, the northern part of Albania, they were considered the lowest of the society. So in the moment that you challenged the rules of the man, they respected you. They all knew that you were a Swiss virgin, but they respected. Sorry, that was lovely. Yes, this was nice. This was nice. It was a very important. Yeah. They respected you.
I think that's ended all prohibitive funding now.
So you were the only woman as a man to go and drink with men. You could shoot and be shot. So they respected you for that. So in all her solitude, the only license and the only shortcut I took, because I felt comfortable with it, is to make Hannah an English language student. But she was so alone, so lonely, she couldn't tell anyone that she regretted the thing she had done, that when she went to the United States, to her was more important to communicate and to blend in. Before, so much so that in the book, many times she says, there is no hurry, she says to her cousin, who wants to rush up things and say, hey, now you are here. And she said, there is no hurry, there is time for that, there is time for that. So language, in a way, was the thing that built the bridge for her.
And when I finished this book, which I absolutely adore with passion, and I can't thank you enough for publishing it, but also Clarissa for the absolutely wonderful translation, and I suppose we have to thank you as well for writing it. But anyway,
it's Clarissa for me, because without Clarissa, the book would have never seen the light of the day in English. And then it went. I mean, she was the bridge, and she did the job, and then it was the fact. So.
In the brown envelope. But also, it feels when you come to the end, you just want to hear part 2. You want to hear what happened to and the sequel. But can I just ask you, Stefan, before, and as a publisher too, this is a great story. As you said, it's not it's strange, but it's an absolutely fantastic, unputdownable story in that sense. What happens to Hannah? And this is such an unusual story as well. And how do you think, having been a publisher of foreign fiction for quite a while now, how do you think that readers are responding to these, in speech marks, unusual stories from around the world? Not strange, but unusual.
Oh, I mean, I don't think, if there's a problem with not enough translations coming out, it's not the readers. I mean, readers, I think, obviously there are some readers who only want to read stories about British World War II
linear narratives.
But, there's plenty of readers who want to read all sorts of stories and are curious about the whole world. The problem is just more simple things like economics of translation costs and tour costs when the author isn't local and all that kind of stuff. And the fact, so the problems are not because people aren't keen to read the stories. Absolutely.
Has it got better over the last few years? So this book came out in 2014.
There are more translations published. I don't think there are necessarily more copies of each translation being sold, unless you win the Man Booker International or something. But that's obviously a nice new prize to sort of throw into the mix. But
and the EBRD.
And indeed, yeah. No, obviously there are some wonderful things happening. On the whole, I think there's still, it's still a hard gig. Yeah.
Stefan has lugged these books all the way from his empire in the north.
And I don't want to lug them back.
And he doesn't want to put them back. So everyone has got to sell them. Sell them especially high priced to all of you. And Elvira, I know, is happy to. Elvira and maybe Clarissa are happy to sign. So Elvira Dones, thank you very much. Happy birthday to you. And Clarissa Botsford, it's been an enormous pleasure. It's been wonderful to meet you. Thank you so much. Thank you for translating. And Stefan, it's too rare a pleasure to see you. It is wonderful to see you here. Thank you for coming. Okay, thank you.